I never thought I'd be the guy who catches his wife in the act, literally. But life has a way of throwing grenades when you least expect them. That day, I got off work early. A last-minute decision, just a whim to surprise my wife, Jessica. Maybe take her out for dinner, relive some of the good days before things started feeling off. I should have known better. The signs were there, her sudden interest in fitness, the way she'd angle her phone away when I walked into the room, the new lingerie I never got to see her wear. As I turned into our neighborhood, I spotted an unfamiliar car parked down the street. A sleek black sports car, way out of place in our suburban cul-de-sac. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a visitor at the neighbor's. But as I rolled closer, I caught sight of something through the windshield, Jessica's blonde head bobbing up and down in the driver's seat, her hands gripping some stranger's thighs. My stomach dropped. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It was like my mind rejected the image outright, as if by refusing to acknowledge it, I could make it not real. But it was real. My wife, the woman I had spent the last 8 years building a life with, was on her knees in another man's car, giving herself to him like I didn't even exist. I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My body was frozen between fight and flight, my heart hammering against my ribs like a war drum. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and ragged. I should have walked away. I should have kept driving, gone home, and figured out my next move in private. I drove past the house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought I might tear the leather. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn around, to rip open that car door and drag her out into the street, to make them both understand what they had done. But I didn't. I kept driving, my mind spinning in 1,000 directions at once. I needed to think. I pulled into the driveway, cutting the engine and sitting there in silence. The house, our house, stood still and unassuming, as if nothing had happened. As if my entire world hadn't just crumbled in the span of a few sickening seconds. A part of me wanted to tear through the place, to throw her things into the street and be done with it. But another part of me, the part that had spent years learning how to stay calm under pressure, forced me to sit there and breathe. No rash decisions. Not yet. I went inside, moving on autopilot. The house smelled like lavender, her favorite candle burning on the kitchen counter. A leftover attempt at normalcy, I suppose. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at nothing, running through every moment from the last few months that suddenly made perfect, infuriating sense. The late nights. The way she avoided my touch. The unexplained charges on our credit card. The perfume I didn't recognize on her clothes. I had suspected something was wrong, but I never let myself believe it could be this. 15 minutes passed before I heard her car pull into the driveway. She walked in, keys jingling as she tossed them into the bowl by the door. The second she saw me, her eyes flickered with something, surprise, maybe even a flash of panic, but she buried it so fast that if I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed it. Then I saw it. Wet spots on her shirt. Small, but unmistakable. I pointed it out to her, my voice steady, casual even. She looked down, barely missing a beat before laughing it off. "Ice cream," she said. She had stopped for some on the way home, and apparently, she was clumsy. She shrugged like it was nothing, like she had no reason to think I'd question it. I said nothing. She gave me a quick, forced smile before announcing she was going to take a shower. And just like that, she disappeared down the hall, her footsteps light, unbothered. I sat down, gripping the arms of the chair so hard my nails dug into the fabric. Ice cream. That was her excuse. That was the best she could come up with. She had just finished another man in his car, then strolled into our home and lied to my face like it was second nature. And maybe it was. How many times had she done this before? How many nights had I gone to bed thinking she was exhausted from work, only for her to sneak out and spread her legs for someone else? The thought made my blood turn to ice. I heard the water start running in the bathroom, the steady hum of the shower filling the house. She was washing him off of her, scrubbing away the evidence so she could crawl into bed next to me like nothing had happened. She thought she had gotten away with it. I let her think that. For now. Because if she was capable of looking me in the eye and feeding me a lie that easily, then I needed to be smarter. More patient. More calculated. Rage wouldn't solve this. Evidence would. And once I had enough, she would regret every single lie she ever told me. The moment Jessica disappeared into the bathroom, I forced myself to sit still. To think, not react. She had lied to my face so easily, like it was second nature. That meant she had done this before. Probably more times than I wanted to imagine. And if she had been careful enough to hide it this long, then whoever she was seeing wasn't some one-time fling. It was ongoing. Planned. I needed to find out who he was. For the next few days, I kept everything normal. I played my part. I still kissed her in the morning before work, still asked her about her day, still acted like the oblivious husband she expected me to be. But I started paying attention. I memorized her schedule, the times she left, the times she came back. And when she told me she was going out with friends, or staying late at work, I made sure I wasn't far behind. It didn't take long. 3 nights later, I followed her. She left around 8 p.m., dressed just a little too well for what she had told me was a casual dinner with her friend Melissa. I let her get a head start before I took a different route, cutting through the back streets so she wouldn't spot me. She didn't go to a restaurant. A few blocks from our house, she turned onto a side street and parked. It was darker there, fewer streetlights, just the occasional porch glow from nearby houses. I pulled up a safe distance away, killing my lights and watching. Then I saw it. The same black sports car. My stomach clenched as she got out of her car and walked straight toward the driver's side of his. The window rolled down, and she leaned in, her hands resting on the edge of the door. I lifted my phone, my pulse steady despite the fury boiling underneath my skin. I hit record. Jessica climbed into the passenger seat, laughing at something he said. He reached for her, his hands sliding over her thighs. She melted into him so easily, her lips on his like they belonged there. Like she hadn't just kissed me goodbye an hour ago. Then it happened again. She moved down. His head tilted back. It was just like before, only this time, I didn't have to wonder if I was imagining things. I had it all on video. I kept the camera steady, zooming in when needed. Every little detail mattered. The way she touched him. The way he ran his fingers through her hair. The way she looked up at him afterward, smiling like he was the center of her world. And then, when she climbed back into the passenger seat and adjusted herself, I got what I really needed. His license plate. I zoomed in, snapped a clear shot. Now I had everything. The proof. The identity of the car. The face of the man who had decided that my wife belonged to him. The final nail in the coffin. I didn't leave right away. I sat there in the darkness, watching as they talked, as they kissed again, as she laughed at whatever charming thing he whispered in her ear. I watched until she got out, until she walked back to her car and drove off toward home, no doubt already thinking of what lie she'd feed me this time. I waited until she was gone. Then I stepped out of my truck and walked over to where the black sports car was still idling. The man sat there for a second, checking his phone, probably waiting to make sure she was really gone. I walked right past him. Not close enough for him to see my face, but close enough for me to glance through the window. Dark hair, clean-shaven, maybe early 40s. Expensive watch. A man who thought he was untouchable. I memorized everything about him. Then I turned around and walked away. Jessica had no idea what was coming. Jessica had gotten home before me. That was intentional. I wanted her to have time to get comfortable, to believe she had fooled me yet again. By the time I walked through the front door, she was in the kitchen, pretending to scroll through her phone. The moment she saw me, her body stiffened. She wasn't expecting me to come home this late. I could see it in her eyes, the way she hesitated for just a second before forcing a smile. But I had been watching her long enough to know when she was faking. I kept my voice calm, casual. Told her I had been at Peter's, an old friend from college. A cop. Her reaction was instant. A flicker of panic in her eyes, quickly masked. She asked why I was suddenly visiting Peter after all these years, her tone light, but I saw through it. I shrugged, gave a vague answer. Nothing important. Just catching up. She tried to act normal after that, but her movements were just a little too quick, her smile a little too forced. She excused herself soon after, saying she was exhausted, and disappeared into the bedroom. She knew something was off. Good. The next morning, after she left for work, I called Peter. We hadn't spoken in a while, but that didn't matter. Some friendships don't fade, no matter how much time passes. Peter was that kind of friend, the kind who didn't need explanations. When I told him I needed a favor, he didn't ask why. I gave him the license plate number. A few hours later, he called back with a name. Ryan Caldwell. Married. 2 kids. A successful financial advisor with an office downtown. A man who, on paper, was living the perfect life. I laughed at that. People like Ryan always think they're untouchable. That their lies will never catch up with them. That they can sneak around, wreck homes, and walk away without consequences. Not this time. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could about him. Where he worked. His schedule. The places he and Jessica met when they weren't hiding in his car like a couple of teenagers. I even found his wife's social media, family photos, smiling vacations, posts about their perfect marriage. It was all so predictable. Jessica had no idea that while she was sneaking around, I was moving the pieces into place. She thought she was still in control, that I was still the oblivious husband she had been fooling for months. She had no idea she was already losing. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to destroy them. And I was going to make sure she felt every second of it. Everything was in place. I had studied Ryan's schedule meticulously. His work hours, his gym sessions, even the route he took home. I knew when he was alone, when he was with his wife, and most importantly, when he was with Jessica. It wasn't hard to find the right people for the job. There are always guys willing to take care of a problem if the price is right. I made sure they understood the rules, nothing that would land them in prison, nothing that would leave permanent damage. But it had to hurt. It had to be a lesson. When Jessica announced that she was going to see her friend again, I didn't even react. Just a nod, a smile, the perfect picture of a trusting husband. She left without hesitation, completely unaware that I was only a few cars behind her, watching as she made her way downtown. This time, she didn't meet Ryan in his car. She met him at a hotel. It was almost funny, how predictable she had become. I waited until they disappeared inside before making the call. The specialists were already on standby. I gave them the location, the room number, and the perfect window of opportunity. Ryan had no idea that the most painful night of his life was about to begin. I imagined the scene as I sat in my truck across the street, waiting. They would get comfortable first. Maybe share a drink. Laugh. Then they'd move to the bed, the same way they always did. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I had calculated the timing perfectly. Just as things reached their peak, just as Ryan was at his most vulnerable, the door would burst open. And the lesson would begin. I didn't need to see it happen. I knew the kind of work these men did. It would be quick but brutal. A few cracked ribs, maybe a dislocated shoulder. Just enough to remind him that no matter how untouchable he thought he wasn't. And the best part? Jessica would be right there to witness it. When I got the confirmation that the job was done, I moved to the next part of my plan. I sent Ryan's wife the video. The one I had taken of Jessica in his car, her head in his lap, her hands gripping his thighs. The angle was clear, the evidence undeniable. I didn't add a message. I didn't need to. I imagined her sitting at home, maybe watching TV, checking her phone absent-mindedly. And then, seeing her husband for what he truly was. A liar. A cheater. A man who had taken everything she had built and pissed all over it. The consequences would unfold naturally. When Jessica finally returned home later that night, she looked pale, shaken. She didn't even speak at first, just walked through the door and stood there, her hands gripping the strap of her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She kept glancing at me, waiting for me to ask her what was wrong, but I didn't. I just sat there, watching her squirm. Finally, she muttered something about Ryan being attacked. That it had been horrible. That she didn't know why it happened. She was lying again. Even now, standing in front of me, shaken and afraid, she still thought she could deceive me. I pulled out my phone. Opened the video. And hit play. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. For once, she had no words. No excuses. No clever lies. I stood up, walked past her, and opened the front door. She didn't move. I didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. This wasn't her home anymore. She grabbed her things in silence. Walked past me, head down, her entire body trembling. I watched as she stepped out into the night, the same way she had so many times before. Only this time, she wasn't sneaking off to meet Ryan. She was leaving for good. I shut the door behind her. And just like that, it was over.